I've taken our render into Nuke. This is our beauty render, and I have created a advanced back to beauty by simply copying it from an earlier scene. I've turned all these grade nodes off. These are going to be used to explain something a little bit later. And over here we have all our kinds of light selects. Remember that I created every kind, even the ones I don't really use. Now the one which we're going to look at here is called the full light. So when I add them all together, everything is the same. I have broken the alpha channel. Now pay attention to this, because if you've not got a scene like this where the alpha is essentially solid, you are going to get into trouble with this. So you should always, after the fact, you can create a copy node. And with that copy node, you want to bring that in here and just bring the original alpha back in clean, straight off the beauty. You would also, at that point, wish to work unpremultiplied during your color correction phase. However, that to one side, we can see that the color values are identical, and that's wonderful, and it means we can now effectively switch any of these lights off or grade them in any way. We can switch off the moon, we could switch off the fill, we could switch off the HDRI. We can also use this to analyze our scene. So we can see the lamp select, we can see how noisy it is, we can see that the moonlight is relatively clean, the fill light is very clean, and the HDRI light is incredibly noisy. So that's also another use of these passes. Of course, we can now subtly grade them, make the moonlight a little bit blue. Let's switch this one off. We could boost the amount of HDRI light. We can do all kinds of things. We obviously in the demo switched off our lamp. For completeness, I've shown you the last form of lighting layers, which I don't really use very much. They're not quite equivalent to any of the beauty elements, but these are the raw lights. So they're quite interesting, but when you add them together, you get something that is not the same as our raw lighting pass. And you can see that here I've shuffled in our raw lighting pass, and if I toggle between that and our result, you will see that we don't get anything equivalent. If we multiply that by the diffuse, we do not get our lighting element either. So we should do, but we don't. So it's not quite equivalent to that. It's a lot noisier. It's reasonably close, so that's why I've put it kind of almost equals them. And because it doesn't quite work within the maths, I tend not to use it. Now, before we had the full light select, which includes SSS and reflections and refractions, we only had within V-Ray the light select direct. So if you're an older version of V-Ray, you might find that you don't have access to the full light select. The light select direct, if we look at it, gives us just the diffuse and the specular. Now that's reasonably useful, but it's much more useful if you can break the two apart. And so I probably wouldn't use the light select direct. What I would do is get this, which combines to create the exact same result: light select direct, light select specular and diffuse. But of course, having them split out is quite handy, because over here we have this diffuse, which is exactly equivalent. Here we have a shuffle node of our lighting to our old friend. Let's make a postage stamp. To our old friend, the lighting pass from Back to Beauty. So we have that, and we have that, and these are exactly equivalent. We can also recreate our specular layer from its constituent lights. So we can find the specular contribution of each and every light and switch them on and off, or grade them. So increase the specular contribution from the fill light, for example. Use it less as a fill, more as a sort of kicker. And we can, for example, remove some of the contribution of our HDRI to the diffuse, and therefore reduce some of the noise that we're getting from it. But of course, how will this work with the rest of our passes? Let's have a look. So this advanced Back to Beauty with all the grade nodes switched off is identical to the original render, as you can see. again, we will need to pay attention to the alpha in a scene where the alpha is doing more than nothing. Now, what you've done when you get to the bottom of here, assuming you haven't changed very much, is you can use the opposite of a plus, which is a from, and subtract a light from the render. So we can subtract the lamp light and then plus it back in. But what you've done here is you've created a stream whereby you can color correct your lamp. So I can make a color correct here, plug it into the stream here. Now it's important that it's not plugged into the from. If it's plugged into both, I can do what I like here and it won't change anything, because whatever I'm subtracting is the same as what I'm adding. But if I just have this in the plus stream, I can contrast that light, I can adjust gamma of the lamp light, I can adjust the saturation and so forth. So I can do lots of things to manipulate that light. I can even switch it off as we did in the demo. And that works fine as long as we're reasonably close to the original light. Let's keep the lamp switched off, as that's a fairly extreme manipulation. And let's just grade our SSS a bit. And you see with these subtle grades, it's still kind of working pretty well. So again, we could maybe grade the reflections a little bit. We could just sort of gamma them down a tiny bit. I can start to see weirdness around the light bulb there. So already things are starting to go wrong. That's because we've included all of the lights here. So we've got all the lights including the lamp light. We've graded them all together, so we've even graded the lamp light. Then we're subtracting the original lamp light, which has had no back to beauty manipulations applied to it, and therefore there's actually more in the darker areas than there were in the original, and we even get possibly negative values, or we get very low values. Here we have negative in the red. Now that's fine if in our lamp select we're subtle. So if we're subtle in the beauty passes, we can use this correctly, and if we're subtle in our light manipulations, it will work with extreme changes in the back to beauty. So you can have strong changes within the back to beauty and subtle changes within the light selects, or vice versa, but you cannot have your cake and eat it. You can't have both. Coming down here, I've done some more subtle manipulations. I'm just going to remove the diffuse contribution of the HDRI and then plus it back in. And this grade node, grade 4, is just bringing it back in at 45%. So if we look at the result of that, turn that grade node on and off, we're just reducing the amount of diffuse contribution from the HDRI. And I've done the same thing with the fill light specular, removed it with a from and then added it back in, and this grade node is making it a little bit brighter, a little bit cooler, and so we get a bit more specular highlight from the fill light. So as you can see, these are quite powerful. You have to be a little bit careful. You can't do whatever you like. There are limits, but it's a very powerful workflow indeed. Thank you very much.